A podcast is a program made available in digital format for download over the internet. Typically, a podcast is an episodic series of digital audio files that users can download to a personal device or stream to listen to at a time of their choosing. Podcasts are primarily an audio medium, but some distribute in video, either as their primary content or as a supplement to audio, popularized in recent years by video platform YouTube. In 2025, Bloomberg reported that 1 billion people are watching podcasts on YouTube every month. A podcast series usually features one or more recurring hosts engaged in a discussion about a particular topic or current event. Discussion and content within a podcast can range from carefully scripted to completely improvised. Podcasts combine elaborate and artistic sound production with thematic concerns ranging from scientific research to slice-of-life journalism. Many podcast series provide an associated website with links and show notes, guest biographies, transcripts, additional resources, commentary, and occasionally a community forum dedicated to discussing the show's content. The cost to the consumer is low, and many podcasts are free to download. Some podcasts are underwritten by corporations or sponsored, with the inclusion of commercial advertisements. In other cases, a podcast could be a business venture supported by some combination of a paid subscription model, advertising, or product delivered after sale. Because podcast content is often free, podcasting is often classified as a disruptive medium, adverse to the maintenance of traditional revenue models. Podcasting is the preparation and distribution of audio or video files using RSS feeds to the devices of subscribed users. A podcaster normally buys the service from a podcast hosting company such as SoundCloud or Libsyn. Hosting companies then distribute these media files to podcast directories and streaming services, such as Apple and Spotify, which users can listen to on their smartphones or digital music and multimedia players. As of June 2024, there are at least 3,369,942 podcasts and 199,483,500 episodes. Podcast is a portmanteau of iPod and broadcast. The earliest use of podcasting was traced to The Guardian columnist and BBC journalist Ben Hammersley, who coined it in early February 2004 while writing an article for The Guardian newspaper. The term was first used in the audio blogging community in September 2004, when Danny Gregoire introduced it in a message to the iPodder mailing list, from where it was adopted by podcaster Adam Curry. Despite the etymology, the content can be accessed using any computer or similar device that can play media files. The term podcast predates Apple's addition of podcasting features to the iPod and the iTunes software. In September 2000, early MP3 player manufacturer i2go offered a service called myaudio2go.com, which allowed users to download news stories for listening on a PC or MP3 player. The service was available for about a year until i2go's demise in 2001. In October 2000, the concept of attaching sound and video files in RSS feeds was proposed in a draft by Tristan Lewis. The idea was implemented by Dave Weiner, a software developer and an author of the RSS format. In August 2004, Adam Curry launched his show Daily Source Code, focused on chronicling his everyday life, delivering news and discussions about the development of podcasting. Curry promoted new and emerging internet audio shows in an attempt to gain traction in the development of what would come to be known as podcasting. Daily Source Code was initially directed at podcast developers. As its audience became interested in the format, these developers were inspired to create and produce their own projects, and a community of pioneer podcasters quickly developed. iPodder X, released in September 2004 by August Trometer and based on earlier work by Ray Slakinski, was the first GUI application for podcasts. In June 2005, Apple released iTunes 4.9, which added formal support for podcasts, thus negating the need to use a separate program in order to download and transfer them to a mobile device. Additionally, Apple issued cease and desist orders to many podcast application developers and service providers for using the term iPod or pod in their products' names. By 2007, audio podcasts were doing what was historically accomplished via radio broadcasts, which had been the source of radio talk shows and news programs since the 1930s. This shift occurred as a result of the evolution of Internet capabilities along with increased consumer access to cheaper hardware and software for audio recording and editing. As of early 2019, the podcasting industry still generated little overall revenue, although the number of persons listening to podcasts continued to grow steadily. Edison Research, which issues the Podcast Consumer Quarterly Tracking Report, estimated that 90 million persons in the U.S. had listened to a podcast in January 2019. In 2020, 58% of the population of South Korea and 40% of the population of Spain had listened to a podcast in the last month, 12.5% of the UK population had listened to a podcast in the last week, and 22% of the United States population listened to at least one podcast weekly. The form is also acclaimed for its low overhead for creators to start and maintain podcasting, merely requiring a microphone, a computer or mobile device, and associated software to edit and upload the final product. Some form of acoustic quieting is also often utilized. Between February-March 10 and 25, 2005, Shea Spencer Management, LLC of Fairport, New York filed a trademark application to register the term podcast for an online pre-recorded radio program over the Internet. On September 9, 2005, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, USPTO, rejected the application, citing Wikipedia's entry on podcast as describing the history of the term. The company amended their application in March 2006, but the USPTO rejected the amended application as not sufficiently differentiated from the original. In November 2006, the application was marked as abandoned. On September 26, 2004, it was reported that Apple Incorporated had started to crack down on businesses using the string pod in product and company names. Apple sent a cease and desist letter that week to Podcast Ready Incorporated, which markets an application known as MyPodder. Lawyers for Apple contended that the term pod had been used by the public to refer to Apple's music player so extensively that it falls under Apple's trademark cover. Such activity was speculated to be part of a bigger campaign for Apple to expand the scope of its existing iPod trademark, which included trademarking iPod, iPodcast, and Pod. On November 16, 2006, the Apple Trademark Department stated that Apple does not object to third-party usage of the generic term podcast to accurately refer to podcasting services and that Apple does not license the term. However, no statement was made as to whether or not Apple believed they held rights to it. Personal Audio, a company referred to as a patent troll by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, filed a patent on podcasting in 2009 for a claimed invention in 1996. In February 2013, Personal Audio started suing high-profile podcasters for royalties, including The Adam Carolla Show and the How Stuff Works podcasts. In October 2013, the EFF filed a petition with the U.S. Trademark Office to invalidate the Personal Audio patent. On August 18, 2014, the EFF announced that Adam Carolla had settled with Personal Audio. Finally, on April 10, 2015, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office invalidated 5 provisions of Personal Audio's podcasting patent. A podcast generator maintains a central list of the files on a server as a web feed that one can access through the Internet. The listener or viewer uses special client application software on a computer or media player, known as a podcast client, which accesses this web feed, checks it for updates, and downloads any new files in the series. This process can be automated to download new files automatically, so it may seem to listeners as though podcasters broadcast or push new episodes to them. Podcast files can be stored locally on the user's device, or streamed directly. There are several different mobile applications that allow people to follow and listen to podcasts. Many of these applications allow users to download podcasts or stream them on demand. Most podcast players or applications allow listeners to skip around the podcast and to control the playback speed. Much podcast listening occurs during commuting. Because of restrictions on travel during the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of unique listeners in the US decreased by 15% in the last 3 weeks of March 2020. Podcasting has been considered a converged medium, a medium that brings together audio, the web, and portable media players, as well as a disruptive technology that has caused some individuals in radio broadcasting to reconsider established practices and preconceptions about audiences, consumption, production, and distribution. Podcasts can be produced at little to no cost and are usually disseminated free of charge, which sets this medium apart from the traditional 20th century model of gatekept media and their production tools. Podcasters can, however, still monetize their podcasts by allowing companies to purchase ad time. They can also garner support from listeners through crowdfunding websites like Patreon, which provide special extras and content to listeners for a fee. Podcasts vary in style, format, and topical content. Podcasts are partially patterned on previous media genres but depart from them systematically in certain computationally observable stylistic respects. The conventions and constraints which govern that variation are emerging and vary over time and markets. Podcast listeners have various preferences of styles, but conventions to address them and communicate about them are still unformed. Some current examples of types of podcasts are given below. This list is likely to change as new types of content, new technology to consume podcasts, and new use cases emerge. An enhanced podcast, also known as a slidecast, is a type of podcast that combines audio with a slideshow presentation. It is similar to a video podcast in that it combines dynamically generated imagery with audio synchronization, but it is different in that it uses presentation software to create the imagery and the sequence of display separately from the time of the original audio podcast recording. The Free Dictionary, Your Dictionary, and PC Magazine define an enhanced podcast as an electronic slideshow delivered as a podcast. Enhanced podcasts are podcasts that incorporate graphics and chapters. iTunes developed an enhanced podcast feature called audio hyperlinking that they patented in 2012. Enhanced podcasts can be used by businesses or in education. Enhanced podcasts can be created using QuickTime AAC or Windows Media files. Enhanced podcasts were first used in 2006. A fiction podcast, also referred to as a scripted podcast or audio drama, is similar to a radio drama, but in podcast form. They deliver a fictional story, usually told over multiple episodes and seasons, using multiple voice actors, dialogue, sound effects, and music to enrich the story. Fiction podcasts have attracted a number of well-known actors as voice talents, including Demi Moore and Matthew McConaughey, as well as from content producers like Netflix, Spotify, Marvel Comics, and DC Comics. Unlike other genres, downloads of fiction podcasts increased by 19% early in the COVID-19 pandemic. A podcast novel, also known as a serialized audiobook or podcast audiobook, is a literary form that combines the concepts of a podcast and an audiobook. Like a traditional novel, a podcast novel is a work of literary fiction. However, it is recorded into episodes that are delivered online over a period of time. The episodes may be delivered automatically via RSS or through a website, blog, or other syndication method. Episodes can be released on a regular schedule, example once a week, or irregularly as each episode is completed. In the same manner as audiobooks, some podcast novels are elaborately narrated with sound effects and separate voice actors for each character, similar to a radio play or scripted podcast, but many have a single narrator and few or no sound effects. Some podcast novelists give away a free podcast version of their book as a form of promotion. On occasion, such novelists have secured publishing contracts to have their novels printed. Podcast novelists have commented that podcasting their novels lets them build audiences even if they cannot get a publisher to buy their books. These audiences then make it easier to secure a printing deal with a publisher at a later date. These podcast novelists also claim the exposure that releasing a free podcast gains them makes up for the fact that they are giving away their work for free. A video podcast is a podcast that features video content. Web television series are often distributed as video podcasts. Dead End Days, a serialized dark comedy about zombies released from October 31, 2003 through 2004, is commonly believed to be the first video podcast. A number of podcasts are recorded either in total or for specific episodes in front of a live audience. Ticket sales allow the podcasters an additional way of monetizing. Some podcasts create specific live shows to tour which are not necessarily included on the podcast feed. Events including the London Podcast Festival, SF Sketchfest, and others regularly give a platform for podcasters to perform live to audiences. Podcast episodes are widely stored and encoded in the MP3 digital audio format and then hosted on dedicated or shared web server space. Syndication of podcasts episodes across various websites and platforms is based on RSS feeds, an XML formatted file citing information about the episode and the podcast itself. The most basic equipment for a podcast is a computer and a microphone. It is helpful to have a soundproof room and headphones. The computer should have a recording or streaming application installed. Typical microphones for podcasting are connected using USB. If the podcast involves 2 or more people, each person requires a microphone, and a USB audio interface is needed to mix them together. If the podcast includes video, then a separate webcam might be needed, and additional lighting. Thank you for watching this video.